Have you ever wanted to pull your hair out, I guess if you have hair, in the middle of a conflict? Or felt like you just wanted to scream at the top of your lungs? Or felt like you couldn't be any more frustrated with the other person? Well, conflict is emotional. And the next few slides that we're going to look at in a moment are related to information in a chapter on emotions by Jones and an article on emotions by Bodker and Jameson that each related to conflict and how we experience conflict emotionally. And it's not just a cognitive act. And a lot of the ways that we approach conflict management is to look at it as being primarily, basically, cognitive. That is, you do A, B, and C, and it should improve your conflict management skills. However, at the emotional level, it may not help us in terms of processing through our emotions. So, basically what Bodker and Jameson did is they identified 3 components of conflict in terms of the emotional components. And they defined these as first, behavioral, being the ways that we express emotions, both nonverbal and verbally, which can be kind of difficult for us to understand because we normally associate behavioral with nonverbal. But I talked about how we have underdeveloped emotional vocabularies, which means that it's very difficult to accurately tell other people how we feel, and that we're not very specific and we don't go into a lot of depth on it. And so we're not really going to have very good understanding between individuals of what our emotions are. And sometimes we may not even understand our emotions very well ourselves because of this, because we don't have correct labels for them. Also, there are different cultural display rules for how you display emotions. For example, if you are ever in a romantic relationship with someone who comes from a family who they hash everything out and they say exactly what they feel when they feel it, and you're from a family who holds everything in and doesn't talk about what you feel when you feel it, and you have different display rules about how you deal with emotions and how you talk them through, and that just will probably exasperate the relationship at a given time if you don't realize what's going on and figure out a way that you can work together to discuss your emotions effectively. Physiologically is the second component of emotional experience. This is the bodily experience. Emotions are embodied. They're linked to our very identity. And many times you actually feel an emotion. And if you've ever been really frustrated, really stressed out, and gotten sick before, you understand sort of the extreme of the physiological nature of emotions. Then the third component of emotional experience is the cognitive component of emotional experience. This is thinking through your emotions, engaging in what we call emotional appraisals, where you figure out why you're feeling what you're feeling and you appraise and you start to legitimize your emotions by giving reasons for why you have the emotion that you have. So this just kind of gives you a background on emotions. And what we're going to do through the triadic theory of emotions by Gottlang is we're going to make applications to conflict management and how we experience conflict. So in the triadic theory of emotions, which encompasses behavioral, physiological, and cognitive, Gottlang first talked about attitudes and how attitudes are both cognitive and emotional, and how we have behavior related to them, which is both avert and also the potential for aggression. And so if someone perceives that someone could be aggressive, then this would be labeled under the behavior. And then you have contradiction, that is incompatibilities of values and interests. And what Gottlang was saying and how Bodker and Jameson applied it was that our attitudes and our contradictions are oftentimes latent. That is, we don't realize them. They're not even at our level of consciousness. We may experience emotion. We may experience a cognitive appraisal of that emotion related to our attitudes. We may experience incompatibilities, but we may not be aware of them. And that level of awareness is what we need in order to explore them, because how can you transform, how can you resolve a conflict if you don't even know what you're having a conflict over, if you don't even know how much this is hurting you, if you don't even know how frustrated you are, if you don't even know the degree of the incompatibilities that you have, if you don't even know that it's a value contradiction going on there, how can you resolve it is the whole principle behind this theory. And what is being advocated is something I didn't put on the side. It's very difficult to pronounce because of, basically it takes consciousness and it makes it into a verb. So it's like conscientization. Woohoo! And this whole idea of conscientization is that you would bring attitudes and contradictions to your level of consciousness. How do you do that though? Interestingly enough, Bodker and Jameson actually advocate that you escalate a conflict. They say that to transform a conflict, it's going to require that you escalate it, because if you don't escalate it, you won't get to the point where you start to talk through those contradictions and attitudes. You won't explore them until it gets to the point where you have to, and you just have to get it all out. And escalation may be necessary, both individually and relationally, for you to acknowledge your emotions, to acknowledge those incompatibilities, and to the depth that they go. However, escalation can have some negative implications, and we're going to explore those later. And at times, if you escalate a conflict too much, it may be very difficult for you to do the opposite, and that is de-escalate and lead to any sort of resolution. There are a variety of approaches to conflict management that help you to deal with both the cognitive and emotional aspects of conflict. And there are some primary styles that we're going to talk about: withdrawal, accommodating, forcing, compromising, and collaborating. And there's one that is not on the slide, but I'll tell you about it in just a moment. It's a feminist approach to conflict management. There are a number of conflict management self-assessments that help you to identify what your primary and secondary styles of conflict management are. There's one in your textbook. I'll post one on your WebCT learning module for the week. And I think that they're helpful in that many times they have you consider a recent conflict. However, what we find through research is that we're very adept at switching conflict management styles based on what our preferences are at the moment, how we feel, the context of the relationship, the content of what we're having a conflict over, what our attitude happens to be, what we think will be most effective within that situation. So there's a lot of reasons why we may switch styles, or why we might use a particular style instead of using another one. Also, additional research indicates that we switch styles even in the same given conflict interaction based on how we think the effectiveness of the style is. Conrad did a very interesting study in which he had people switch style. Well, he didn't have them switch styles. They started out using one style and they basically weren't effective every time, and he looked at how long it would take for someone to switch their style in order to be more effective. And most people switch their style within the second or third iteration, that is the time that they weren't effective, trying to improve their effectiveness. Therefore, you may identify with all of these styles, or you might only identify with one, or you might identify with multiple ones, and we'll talk about them in a moment.